Hello and welcome, Furidashi listeners. Nicholas here. So, last year we did a special behind the scenes episode, and for our Patreon subscribers anyway, and since Lauren is still en route from the Furidashi research bunker somewhere in Antarctica, we were unable to record this week. She will be back next week for more fun shenanigans. But until then, enjoy this free episode. And for our Patreon subscribers, I'm going to be doing something very special later on this week. So if you're listening to this now and you want to know what that is, you're going to have to go and sign up. That's that's patreon.com/Furidashi. And now, here's the episode.
What's a typical day like for you?
How do I put this? Okay, girls, you know how when you just get so mad and frustrated that you just want to scream into a pillow, when you're mad at your mom? Well, I guess you could say for our player community, I'm kind of like their mom. And the pillow.
You're super nice. Oh. I want to do what you do.
No. 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 No.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Patreon episode. I'd like to say a big hello to Secret Squad. I am, as always, here with Lauren, and this is the continuation of our one-year anniversary special, or belated one-year anniversary special. And for Secret Squad, for you guys, for the best ones, don't tell the freebies. Don't tell them that you're the best ones, but you're the best ones.
But you're the best ones.
So for this episode, we wanted to so previously we talked about sort of the high level stuff and sort of like continuations of our arguments from things that we said in the past. But we thought that maybe you guys would want a bit of sort of like background as to like how we produce this, how terribly we are, how bad we are at editing audio and video, and how just generally
just terrible we are. We're just horrible humans. We're just gonna spend the whole episode
how bad you should feel because you pay for this. No, we wanted to get into some of the behind the scenes stuff and like how we like conceptualize episodes, like how we produce them, and just generally have a kind of chill moment to hang out with you guys. So we want you all to sit back. We have beverages, we have snacks. Lauren is eating a scone right now. You can't see that, but she is.
It's a good scone too. It's a blueberry scone with some lemon.
I was eating some peanut M&Ms, so go get yourself a tasty drink while you sit back and listen to the dulcet tones of Nicholas and Lauren and Drive-By Radio. Wait, did I say Drive-By Radio? I meant to say Drive.
You did say Drive-By Radio.
That's the first. That's the first.
That's the first chill thing.
That's the first peek you get into the behind the scenes is all the things that I say in COVID.
Yeah.
I meant to say Drive Time. Yeah.
Welcome to Drive Time Radio. I'm your host, Lauren Ash, here with Nicholas.
Hello, Lauren. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Now it's evening.
We're going to do it. Like,
are we AM radio or are we PM radio?
Well, no, we're AM. We're on AM on the dial. So it's like, 5:20 AM as our as the frequency. But we could be like Furidashi After Dark. Thank you for joining us, everybody. It's like laid back, get yourself a drink, and sit down and relax with Lauren and Nicholas.
Wow.
Okay, so so Lauren, what do we do? How do we do this? How we do?
How we do?
All
right. So something that we always thought about doing was like a kind of behind the scenes inside picture. And so on our first one year anniversary episode, we kind of started the day or this recording session, right, with kind of like a list of like, hey, what are our, top episodes?
Yep.
Right. What are our top episodes? Right. What are arguments that we could have made that were kind of bigger about, like, more in depth about it?
Yep.
And what is an episode that we like actually really enjoyed that really made us have deep thoughts?
Yeah.
And so for those of you who don't know, in psychology, especially in like, I don't know, leadership training and all of that, like, bourgeoisie, like CEO stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of things that have come to light are kind of like deep thought, right? And the finite mindset versus the infinite mindset.
Yep.
And so you'll probably hear it popularized by Simon Sinek, who is, if you don't know, is also the Golden Circle, right? That's kind of where he got his start. Start with Why. It was his first book. And now you have a lot of other like leaders and a lot of other thought people on YouTube that are kind of like, we need to play the infinite game and we need to have these deep thoughts and these discussions and blah, blah, blah. And no, and I think that this is actually a perfect example actually of kind of where we start, right, in our daily recording sessions, is that we always take these inspirations from kind of, ridiculous things, whether it's like, I was watching Bake Off the other day, or right.
Yeah.
Or, like, oh, my daughter did something really cool, or we're playing this game. And I think that that's kind of really, when you think about it, even though we were like, okay, what are our more popular episodes, like, or how do we define popular, right? Like that could be a thing. For us, it's really about taking inspiration from other places and then kind of connecting those other inspirations to game design. For me, I am really into like, I don't know, productivity, leadership theory, and motivational theory. So deep thought is something that is just like, instead of thinking about something being like, oh, that's cool, and then you like pick up your phone and you start chatting to your friends on Discord, right? Or you text somebody. It's really sitting with that thought and thinking like, why is that thought interesting? Why was it interesting to me?
Yeah.
And it's beyond well, I thought it was cool. I've never thought about it before. And I'm like, okay, well, obviously you've never thought about it before because it was interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, why was it interesting? Kind of, right? So whenever we get to that deep thought level, that's when we start kind of hitting record, where we're like, oh, why are we both angry that there's no such thing as a RPG?
Yeah, that is a thing that we tend to do. Almost, we never intended to do this, but we start getting into a discussion, and then one or both of us realize like, oh wait, no, we should actually just be recording this. We should just start right now. So we stop, and then we go back, do the intro bit that we always do, and then sort of like make a nice segue back into the conversation that we were already having. And I think that's really kind of important for you guys to understand, is that like when you're listening to the podcast, you are sort of like getting in medias res a conversation we're already having. So one of the things that we have tried to model for all of you is like the process of our thinking. So instead of just like, we have ideas about like what we're going to talk about, we plan it out, but we don't come up with like, and it's like, it's going to be 5 minutes on this, it's going to be 5 minutes on this, and then we're going to make sure we hit this beat and this beat and this beat and this beat. It's more like, in many ways, how ideas are brought out like in a classroom setting. And it's one of the reasons why we want to do more classroom type stuff. Because if you think about it, in a classroom setting, you might have had like a reading assignment, or you might have had like something you had to look at beforehand. But the expectation, especially like in a more like humanities classroom, is that you come to class with something to say or something to talk about, but not necessarily like a perfectly formed argument. And so then the idea is that in conversation with other people, be it with your teacher, or in this case, between Lauren and myself, or whoever we happen to have on as a guest, we sort of bring out certain ideas through that kind of dialectical process. And that process is really important to us. And so the reason why we start recording at that moment is because we want to show you the process rather than the finished product.
Yeah. And I think that that's kind of crucial, right? Is that a lot of podcasts do have these arguments or do have beats. And then, and those are really instructive, right? I think it is really instructive to have like, this is the argument and this is the thought that we want to kind of do. Yeah. But when it comes to game design theory and it comes to humanities, it is really important that a lot of you may have come from, right? Even in art school, you come and you are expected to have, right, a perfect art piece, like music composition, or, and especially in computer science or in like hard science and biology and microbiology and organic chemistry, like there are right and wrong answers. And I could never get into that type of field of study because I am not very big on right and wrong answers. The way I like to say it for all of my listeners now, the way I like to say it to my sister or to my, I have a family of doctors. Everyone was doing something medical, or construction workers, which with doctors and construction workers and my like heritage, it's everything has to be precise, right? The prescriptions that you give to people or the construction measurements that you have to build when you architect people's houses. If you're not precise, the house falls down or the person dies. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that is like way stress. So I was like, I want a program that I can just kind of bullshit my way through and study wherever I want.
That's
now,
unfair
that's not what I did.
Lauren is being very unfair to herself, but I'm here for it. So go ahead.
that's in my opinion, that is what I did. Now, I guess it is unfair. I guess I did do things and stuff. And like I have a dual major and a dual minor technically.
Well, also, okay.
Yeah.
So I want to break down what you said a little bit because I know you, I don't know you better than you know yourself, but I do know you pretty well. So the thing is, but you work in a creative field, but you also work, and this came out in our conversation with Masao last time, is that video games are sort of strange because like it is a creative field, but is a creative field built upon something that is very like technologically rigid. So like when you're talking about programming and when you're talking about software, because ultimately video games are primarily software. So you have this weird like dialectical relationship between sort of like the fungible creative aspects and the not terribly fungible like underlying like software architecture that you have to deal with.
That's right. It's true.
Yeah. And so you have to kind of make those two work with each other. So while Lauren isn't necessarily coming like, so actually, should we talk a little? I mean, we've alluded to our individual backgrounds before, but I mean, your background at Iowa, I mean, part of the reason why you came to study at Iowa and I met you in the first place is because of creative writing. You wanted to be more explicitly creative in the work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly why I came to Iowa. It's actually really interesting. So I like for me, it's interesting that I also as precise and as self-directed as I am and how, self-directed I tell people to be like fight against the status quo, like, choose your own destiny, blah, 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 blah. All that free will bullshit. At the end of the day, I honestly say that like I follow the path of the universe or I walk the road that God lays before me.
Yeah.
And I say that because the only reason why I discovered that the University of Iowa existed was that I bummed a ride for a friend to get coffee up to a job fair or a college fair in Joplin, Missouri.
Yeah.
I actually went to high school in Missouri. I did not grow up there. That would be unfair to myself.
Yeah.
And too fair to Missouri. And we go to this job fair. I'm walking around with like, I forgot a bag or something because I'm walking around with like my phone and my, like, I wore men's jeans. So I had pockets and I'm carrying like a notepad and a pen. And this person comes up to me and they're like, you look like a writer. And I'm like, was it because I was carrying a notebook or something? Like, I have no idea. But I look over and that was the only thing I wanted to do with my life at the time was I wanted to be a writer. And when people said, oh, so you're going to be a journalist, I'd be like, no. And when I told them I was studying English, they were going to go, oh, you're going to be a teacher. And I was like, no. And they're like, well, what are you going to do? And I was like, well, I'm going to be a writer. And they're like, what are you going to write? If you're not going to write journal, like articles about the news or teach English, I was like, I'm going to write, I don't know, anything I want, like get off my back because I didn't know what I wanted to write yet. I just knew I wanted to be a writer.
Yeah.
And this guy basically goes, oh, you look like a writer. And so I walk over and it's a University of Iowa booth with this really elderly man who's like 6'5", definitely 70 something. I mean, like the thinning, bald, white, professory recruiting officer thing. I don't know.
I think I actually know who this is, and I'm not going to reveal who it is.
Okay. Anyway, so this is man, and he's like, we have our English department is number one in the world. We have the top creative writing program in the entire United States. We're a city of literature. And at the time that I enrolled, the creative writing program was actually number one or number three in the entire world for English writing.
So for those of you who don't know, the University of Iowa actually created the very first MFA, period, ever. So
for creative writing.
Yep. So so it's an extremely prestigious university when it comes to sort of like, I mean, many very famous authors that you would know came out of the MFA program at the University of Iowa. So it's a big deal.
And that is exactly what I wanted to do. I was going to go do an MFA, and they had an undergraduate program that you trained basically under the MFA requirements as an undergrad, and got your I don't even know if it's a BFA or a BA. I don't
It's a
remember
BA.
anymore.
They don't actually have a
It's
BFA.
just a BA. Yeah, it's just a BA in creative writing, and you train in a particular discipline, and you have to test into the discipline. And the earliest you can get to is your second semester of your sophomore year.
Yeah.
And most people don't. Most people do not qualify because that's the minimum, right? And you have to meet not only the university's requirements to test into this program, but you also have to meet the program's requirements. So the university requirements are basically you need to be a junior level.
Yeah.
And if you have coming in with credits, I was actually at a junior level my sophomore year of university. And so for those of us who are if we have international listeners, there are freshman, sophomore, junior, senior for United States colleges.
Yeah.
Freshman basically means year one of your post like high school degree, year two, year three, year four. In my second semester of my year two, they said I had already met the requirements for year three. And so that is actually what allowed me to apply for the program in the spring semester instead of the fall semester. And I actually got in on my first try, which I didn't know was hard. I guess it was.
Yes, it is.
And I also got in for my screenwriting and not for what I wanted to get in, which was my fiction writing. I got in for just my dialogue and my screenwriting because I read a play about like the fifth son of like a brothel family or something. I don't even remember anymore. Or of a theater troupe. But I bring that up because Iowa was for creative writing. As for me, I also then went to Guildhall I actually ended up getting a technology master's instead of a fine arts because I realized that in order to get the same type of precision into video games, you have to be technical.
Yes.
And you can't just be a writer. And I'd also kind of gone through the writing program. And to be fair, I was very recommended from the people that were in the MFA program. They basically told me that I wouldn't get anything from it. And when someone who's in an MFA program telling you not to go into the writing program because you would be wasting your time, I was actually kind of disincentivized from being a writer, even though I guess maybe it was a compliment now that I say it out loud.
Well, it's also just a recognition of the fact that like the MFA program here, because I am here, so I can say here, is a very specific kind of thing. And I mean, it's partially to dissuade students from like getting their hopes up because they might think that like, if they apply and don't get in, that like that's somehow a negative, like it's actually a negative comment on them when really it could just be like, well, no, it's just that the thing we do isn't really the thing you want to do. And that's why you weren't admitted.
Well, I never applied.
I know in your case it's different, but I'm saying I think that's the mindset. It's like it's trying to like communicate to students that like this thing is a specific thing. It's not just like this is the program to become a writer. This is the program to become a writer in a particular way. And if you want to do other things in the way that you very much do, like the kind of writing that you do now is of a very like in narrative systems design, you're not a writer in the same way that like Colson Whitehead is a writer. You're not. I mean, you're both working.
I'm not a literary author. Right. And honestly, like that's why my fiction never got me into any of the fiction courses, or my nonfiction didn't either, because my nonfiction was probably like it was either a little too personal or it was a little too like I was a travel writer at the time as well. So like it was probably like too like international. And then my fiction was science fiction and fantasy. So like that was just abhorred. But my like Red Riding Hood, like sci-fi script play thing, like that was okay. Because it was a play. People don't take plays seriously. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
So to get back,
let's dial back. That was a really fun tangent. Thank you for letting me have that.
Well, the reason why I wanted to bring it up is precisely because, like, so when you guys are listening to one of our episodes, it may seem at times like, Lauren is the like hardcore, like, oh, I'm in game design. I am a robot. I only think about how to manipulate numbers. Whereas I'm the like, hey guys, like, man, I was like reading Foucault and it's like, wow, there's like some ideas. And then I was like playing a game and I was like, whoa, like, what if this?
Whoa, I am the giant eyeball in the forest.
Like, what if you thought about how like, when you and your avatar, you're not like the same, like that's like a representation of yourself. Like, whoa, No, that's actually not really what we are. Like in many ways, both of us sort of have like degrees of, so we talked about, the split in game design between sort of like, there's the creative aspect and then there's sort of like the hard technological aspect and the way those two have to communicate with each other. That's actually true of us as well. So for those of you who don't know, all of the like technical stuff with regards to the production of the podcast, I do. Because I was the one who was actually, so a little bit about my personal background. I mean,
Yeah, let's please go into that,
Yeah.
because they're at this point they're either going, one, we don't think you guys are that caricatures of yourself. That's hilarious. And two, they're probably going, wait, did Nicholas just say that he's the one that does all the technical shit and Lauren does not? And I was like, yes.
For the most part, yes. I mean, not exclusively, but like it's like an 80-20 split in this regard. So like I do all of the editing of the audio. I do the editing of the videos that we put up on YouTube. I'm the one who does, the streaming. So yeah, I do a lot of it. But the reason why is because even though I like did my PhD in comparative literature and I have very much that like, airy fairy, like very sort of lit crit focused, like humanities background. When I was a high school student, my part-time job, the way that I made money is that I did sort of like semi-professional sound and lighting design for theater companies, but then also for bands at clubs and so forth. I think I can admit this now. I was usually getting paid under the table because it was sort of a seedy business arrangement, but it meant
He was a back alley sound designer.
Whenever I got paid, it was always in like filthy 20s that had been like stuffed into an envelope and slid under the table. No, I got paid in a legitimate manner. It was declared in my taxes, et cetera, et cetera. But it always felt a little weird because it was freelance. And so like, I worked on certain things like, I worked a Cheap Trick show one year, which was very boring. And by the way, the members of Cheap Trick are really obnoxious. I did not enjoy them whatsoever. But it was
Cheap Trick is a band.
Is a
so
band.
Everyone is just for all the youth out there. If you don't know that that's a band.
Yeah, it's a pretty old band now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of experience working with like audio design, and like my setup at home for like audio recording is very elaborate because like in order to satisfy me, it needed to be pretty elaborate. Yeah, so that the point that I'm trying to make is that like Lauren and I both have the like airy fairy like creative / humanities stuff and the hard technical stuff. We're always looking at things from both perspectives. And so the reason why it's not just like we're good for talking about these things because we're friends and we can communicate with each other well, but we're also good for talking about these things precisely because we ourselves represent and model that divide that already exists within video game production. And so similarly, when we produce the podcast, and that thing that I was talking about earlier, where we prefer to sort of like begin from an idea and sort of work it out through discussion, like that is also how you do video game production as well. You don't just like, you may think that like, someone comes up with like a design document and then everybody's just like, bam, 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 bam. But in practice, like that's the ideal. And in many ways, like directors would prefer that it work that way.
No, but directors will not prefer that it work that way. Your engineering lead will prefer that it worked out that way. Yeah. The directors are like, we're so happy your documentation is so good. Picture is so excellent. We're actually not going to show it off because it's just that good that we're going to put a pause and we're going to hide it. And then we'll just like do it next time in a milestone. And I'm like, that's great. But are you going to give me the resources so that I can do that? Are you going to give me that money or people and then my engineering lead's like, does that mean your document's not valid and we can't like work on it? And I was like, well, no,
I didn't say that.
I didn't say that, but I mean, yes, but also like, it's deferring, right? It's deferring that thing.
Well, and also because video, and you know this, Lauren, and you can go into it if you want, but like it's a collaborative process. And also like similarly in the same way that like a video game is kind of a dialectic between sort of like creative and hard technological forces, video game production is also often a very real dialogue between people who are more creatively minded and people who are more technically minded. And when video game production works well, those people understand how to communicate with each other. And when it breaks down, it's usually because those people don't really communicate
Yeah,
with each other
no,
very well.
absolutely. And that's also was kind of the focus of my thesis when I went into the master's program was how does the story or the creative aspects, right, of a game communicate with the more rigid mechanical systems of the game.
Yep.
And that is why it's called ludonarrative or ludonarrative harmony or ludonarrative dissonance or ludonarrative resonance, right? And I actually went in and defined maybe a little bit too much. That was my academic airy fairy coming out. Like, what's the difference between cohesion? What's the difference between resonance? What's the difference between harmony? Right. And I truly going into music theory because I was also, I was actually in band. I actually studied voice as well. I was like a professional, I wasn't a professional singer, but I studied under a professional singer for musicals and for theaters.
Yep.
So I had like that Broadway voice. I guess I still do. I don't know. But I've been professionally trained as a vocal star, I guess. And then I also was a conductor. So I conducted my band as well. So when our band director, right, or the band conductor couldn't direct, I did that because I was the drum major, which is the marching band field conductor. Is another time for that. So I was a field conductor and a like classical conductor during my youth. But I bring up that music aspect though, right? Is that that's music is very creative, right? When you think of music and you think of all of that, you think, oh, like composition or you're creating emotion. And that's very important in game design. But if you talk to anybody who's very technical minded, they'll be like, that's not emotion. That's the V effect being triggered after the node that says when like a sound cue plays. Like it's just 5 nodes together. And honestly, as you know, coming from, I guess, my science parents and my scientific background, like that's where I actually find a lot of joy is knowing that people can cry because I put 5 nodes together in some blueprint graph in Unreal or in some script in Unity. Right. And suddenly someone cries because they're like, oh, that was triggered at the right moment. And really, it's just 5 lines of writing, 5 lines of code. Right. And all of a sudden you get someone going, I can't believe that just happened. Like that's magic to me, right? Like that's the process of game design. And I know we're kind of going into the process of game design and it feels strange. It's like a behind the scenes, here's how we think episode, but that's how we think. Like at the end of the day, it's our ideal or hypothesis or something that we take from the outside world. And we're like, man, this makes me think of games differently.
So so let's go back to that point about like how what you see in the podcast really sort of reflects things from our own life. And it's not just like, you know, so like when we did the free to play episode, which is a very good episode, which you should go back and listen to. We're not going to discuss it now because
I think that was free to role play.
Free to role play. You're right. Free to
role play. Episode.
When we were discussing that episode, it was primarily because I had just finished watching Tokyo Joshizukan, which I believe is Tokyo Woman in English. Anyway, but that's what the Japanese title is. Anyway, it's a story about a woman who sort of like starts off her career and then it goes through like her entire career. And then all of the places in Tokyo that she lives at various stages in her career. And then in the final episode, there's this really amazing bit in which she talks about how her life has progressed in the terms of a role-playing game. And it was really sort of like fascinating to sort of think about how like we oftentimes like internally, like when you're talking about a video game, you sort of like internalize its logic and you can immerse yourself in its world, but it's not quite as common to then think about like how the logic that you adopt there gets then applied back to your own life. And this is something that we harp on again and again and again is the way in which like one's life interacts with what you're doing in game and what you're doing in game interacts with your life. So it's not just about like, oh, hey, well, I watched this show, let's talk about it in that way that podcasts often work, but that like we're working through this long extended process of like, how do we conceptualize where video games fit within like an entire human system? And so every single episode that you listen to is a piece of that. And so when we talk about the way our lives relate to what we're talking about in a given episode, it's not just because like, oh, we didn't come up with anything for this week, let's talk about that. It's because we're sort of slowly building out this conceptual system in which we try to model for you how this works. And that's always sort of in the background of our minds. Like, how do we model for you a particular mode of thinking about this? Like, because otherwise, what would be the point of doing this podcast? If we're not doing something that is genuinely novel and useful to people, then it's like, well, then ultimately it's just me and Lauren hanging out. And that's great. I love hanging out with Lauren. And maybe you guys love listening to it, but we like to think that it's a little bit more than that.
Yeah. And to kind of help break down the free to role play episode that we did, that we'll link into the description below as well for you guys to go back and look at that. The argument there for the relatability to your own lives is going to come from a personal story here that I'm going to tell pretty shortly.
Okay.
Or like as short as I possibly can. In that I was out to dinner with my significant other's lead, who actually was the final say in getting him hired, which I didn't know until we had this lunch together. And we're all drinking and we're all eating, and like it's at a German bar that I hadn't been to in like 2 years now because of the panini. And he says, like, he realizes that we've been dating for over a year, which means we actually started at this company and dated like before then.
Yeah.
And he was so surprised because he was like, "Oh, you guys have been dating like a year?" And he was like, "Oh my God," right? And he goes, "Oh," and he looks at me and is like, "I am so excited for your personal growth, like in my personal life." And I never had someone say, "This is a great guy, by the way." So like, I actually know him, like we're friends. This is fine.
Yeah.
It's not like the stranger that I'm just.
This random is, I am so excited for your personal growth.
Yeah. He was like, "I am so excited for your personal growth. Like, you both like have this company, like you're both, this company is a very competitive salary. It's a very great place to work. Honestly, he thought we had just met and that we had just started dating. Now he's realizing that we've been dating longer. And in his brain, I can just read in his face that he's like, "Oh my gosh, like it's going to be so cool to watch you, like maybe like move in together and you live in the city. And then maybe like you guys are going to have an anniversary and then maybe he's going for prom." Like I can just see this guy going through the progression,
the stages of your life. Yeah, literally
the stages of your life,
exactly,
literally, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the relatability here, is that when we watched, when Nicholas was watching this television show, she ended it with, "I have acquired my ring, my career, my apartment,
all the items,
all the items and locations that I need to live a good life in Tokyo." And this guy in the real world is looking at me, right, and going, "Oh my gosh, you have just entered this new level of your life," right? And I think that's what's funny, is that some of you might be thinking, "Oh, I'm used to referring to that as a new chapter of my book," right?
Yeah.
Oh, what? The metaphors that we use to describe our lives are the same metaphors of the popular media and commercial consumption of things. Oh, this is the next season arc of my story. This is the next episode, right? Oh, what a sitcom this situation is, right? You don't talk about your life in this weird abstract, metaphor, completely devoid of all media.
Yeah.
And if you do, you are living like Thoreau in the woods. And for those who don't know, Thoreau is a man.
In the sense that like your sister is bringing you food whenever you need it, and you're like, a mile from town and you can walk in.
And you're a mile from town and you can walk from her, but you are in the woods. Wow, so far. It's like you're living in East Bay. Sorry. Bay Area joke there.
Okay.
But I mean, I think that's really important, right?
Yeah.
Is that when we look at video game design, at least on this podcast, and we do talk about it and we do ramble and we talked about our backstories. Mine was probably a little too long. Sorry about that.
No, it was great.
And I think that it's really important to realize that the people that we are, the things that we do, and the literature that we consume, whether that literature is a book, right? Or that literature is you playing Uncharted or Last of Us or Call of Duty Warzone, right? It is something that you are going to look back at your life and take to another movie that you see. Yeah. And you're going to get up and go to the restroom because you're going to go, "Oh, I don't need to see the part where he, does that stairwell chase and defeats all the bad guys."
Yeah.
Or like, "Oh, I can already tell that, this twist is going to happen, so I can go get a refill on popcorn." Like it's that type of mentality, right? That not everyone has. And I'm honestly, maybe not everyone should, right? But that at least on this podcast, we have that mentality. And we hope that we don't ruin the magic of playing the games for you, but we at least kind of show you how that magic operates.
Well, I don't think we ruin it at all. I would suggest that like what we're doing is providing for you, like even if you're not necessarily a game designer, like oftentimes we sort of fall into this trap, in conceptualizing our episodes where like we feel like we're addressing some like hypothetical dev, whether it's like our hapless level designer or whatever. But even if you're not that person, even if you have no interest in game design, even if you have no interest in going into the industry, it's still worthwhile to think about the games you play, the media that you consume in this way, precisely because it's about integrating it into like an entire life system, an entire way of seeing the world, rather than it just being a diversion. For us, it's more meaningful to have this perspective on the media that we consume, and especially on the video games that we talk about, precisely because that draws greater significance to them. And so to end maybe on like a sort of a personal note for the podcast, not a personal note for like us individually, where Lauren and I were at in our own lives when we started this podcast was extremely up in the air. Um, Lauren was just finishing up the previous job that she had held for a very long time. I was moving from Syracuse to Iowa. I have since like left my job at Syracuse, and I can't talk about my new job. But the thing is, like now through the podcast, we have gotten to a place where we're not only more stable, but also like we reconnected with each other. We sort of reconnected with like what is valuable about like thinking critically. We reconnected with like, people out there who have been listening. We have connected with like, Babby devs who like I personally I want to, so if any of the Babby devs are listening to the Patreon episode, I personally want to say like I love talking to you. I'm actually getting a little emotional saying this.
Yeah, I
Excuse
can
me.
see his face. You can't see his face right now, but I can see his face.
It
So
really
it is.
means a lot to me personally because I hate the academy so much, but the one thing that I have never ever 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 hated about teaching are my students because I don't even think I can finish the fucking episode.
Yeah, I if you guys could see his face right now, basically Nicholas is just trying to say that like, the academy and the institution, it's true. I had this existential kind of dread when I realized that certain programs, especially at the university levels and at the academy, are better for minorities than others. And some take advantage of minority developers and putting them into academy-like programs that may set them up for a cool student game that's novel, but then doesn't actually give them the skills that they need to get into AAA, which is their ultimate goal.
Yep.
Where other programs are situated as we'll give you the skills to get into AAA, but only if you choose the easiest ones to teach, being right programming
Yep.
or art or animation.
Yep.
And even others, right, will go so far as to say, but only if you can pay like $100,000, which, as you know from critical race theory, if you are a minority American in the world, or even or an immigrant, right, coming here, right, or an international student, I mean, yeah, only if you decide to get into debt with the United States government will we decide to teach you the skills necessary to succeed in life. And I think that that's what we hate, right?
Yes, exactly.
Man, the developers coming out of those programs are just, I don't want to be like perfect because nobody's perfect, but I mean, it's just quintessentially new and innovative, and it pushes the industry forward in a way that truly mass market appeal games just cannot. And sometimes will not, because no one will invest in them. And it sucks to say that no one's investing in our students or our youth. Man, wow, am I like that old person now? But like when you have to invest in yourself, you're going to create something that is truly more innovative than those that get investment from others. And so to all of the students out there and the lifelong learners, people that are students, I went to my master's program had someone who was 45 years old to complete it. So I just want you to be aware that it's not an age. Being a student is not an age.
Yeah.
So when we say baby developers, you can be 70, you can be 7, you can be 17. Okay. All good. You're all the same baby developer, and we love you all. And you are really moving things forward. And thank you for listening. If you are listening out there, and if you're not a Babby developer and you have nothing to do with it, like remember for those students or the smaller projects that you see, look at them knowing that those are the people that are trying to change the course.
Yes, play those games. Go on itch right now. Find the weirdest, most random game that was made by a couple of people who have like pronouns that you have never heard of before. They may be trans, they may be a minority, like they may just come from a completely different culture, but they are doing the sorts of things that will transform how you think about games. They are doing it. The games themselves are often broken in very bizarre ways, but the brokenness can be fun as well. And I really, really want you to go play those
Yeah.
games. I love playing those games.
Yeah. And even more importantly is if you start playing an experience that you can't relate to, keep playing that experience,
Yes.
because honestly, there are a lot of experiences out there that are the same. And they appeal to a lot of people. And I'm going to put that in heavy scare quotes because they appeal to a lot of a certain mass market demographic.
Yep.
We don't have to talk about. But if you start playing an experience that you're like, I don't relate to this, I don't understand, I don't know what's going on, I don't know why I don't like it, you should keep playing it. And you should start to have that critical thought about, do what we did on this episode and kind of break down, well, where did I come from?
Yeah.
What am I bringing to the table? And maybe where did this person have to come from to create a piece of content that's like this?